In July of 1878, the same year that we left off, the incident that would start the war occurred, during which two wives of a Zulu chief absconded to British-held Natal with their lovers. The two were then captured by a party of Zulu and killed shortly afterwards. The British then requested that the Zulu raiders responsible for the capture be brought to Natal and put on trial. The Zulu agreed to put the raiders on trial, but refused to bring them to Natal, as the murder was committed in Zululand. When news of the Zulu refusal reached Frere, the British colonial administrator, he was outraged and began raising troops. Frere decided to release the Boundary Commission on December 11, 1878, in the form of an ultimatum, which expired in just a month, and would effectively make the Zulu kingdom beholden to the British Empire. On the 18th of December, Cetshwayo sent word that he would only comply with 2 of the terms, but the task would take him longer than just 30 days. Frere dismissed Cetshwayo's attempts at negotiation and prepared for invasion. But before we dive into the war, let's take a quick glance at the army composition, tactics, and organization of both sides, starting with the Zulu. The Zulu recruitment policy at this time was forced conscription for all adult males, and so at their peak, the army was comprised of around 50,000 soldiers, with no cavalry or artillery. Soldiers were distinguished by their shield colors. Young or unmarried soldiers carried black shields, and married soldiers carried red shields. When experience was gained in battle, white markings were added until the entire shield was completely white. So what kind of equipment were the Zulu soldiers carrying alongside their shields? Well, the Zulu made frequent use of the short assegai spear that the fabled Shaka introduced during his reign, although some soldiers opted to use a club-like weapon called the knobkerrie as an alternative. Firearms were also used, but very rarely, and would be mainly acquired from British corpses after the aftermath of a battle. Because of their light equipment and the flat terrain of South Africa, Zulu soldiers were effectively able to march up to 40 to 50 miles a day, or about 2 marathons. As for tactics, the only formation that the Zulu really employed was called the buffalo horns. It was a pincer movement comprised of left and right horns, which were flanking elements made up of younger unmarried troops. The chest, or main force, was made up of unmarried and more experienced troops, and the reserves, or loins, were made up of older veterans. Despite their aggressive attitude in battle, however, the Zulu campaign strategy was one of extreme defensiveness. Now on to the British. All male colonists in Natal had an obligation to serve, but with only 16,000 men, 9,000 of which were native levies, the under-equipped and untrained British forces at the start of the Anglo-Zulu War would be outnumbered 7-1. But despite their inferior numbers, British soldiers did have access to the most technologically advanced weaponry of the time, including Gatling guns, rockets, and cannons. Each British soldier was issued with a Martini Henry rifle with a bayonet attachment. The Martini Henry, which was introduced in 1871, was a single-shot breech-loading rifle. The Martini's primary drawback was its vicious recoil, which may explain why the Zulu experienced difficulty in adopting the weapon during the course of the war. Officers, on the other hand, were usually armed with revolvers, such as the Webley and Adams. In terms of strategy, the British were heavily influenced by the 1870 edition of Field Exercises and the Evolutions of Infantry. This manual followed Napoleonic and Crimean War etiquette, and stipulated that regiments should form into 2 ranks. In colonial warfare, however, British soldiers were told to treat their native foes as cavalry, and to meet them with solid formations, such as square. Now on to the war itself. On January 11, 1879, the British, under command of Lord Chelmsford, officially crossed the Buffalo River and entered into Zululand. Chelmsford decided to split his forces in preparation for a 3-pronged attack. He would deploy 1 British column north, led by Colonel Wood, 1 in the center, led by himself, and 1 on the right, led by Colonel Pearson. All columns were to advance and converge onto the Zulu capital. Chelmsford's intentions with dividing his forces were to secure the border of Natal so that no Zulu armies could slip by and raid the countryside, and even more importantly, to find where the Zulu massed their main army so it could be decisively engaged and destroyed. Just 10 days after Chelmsford's entrance into Zululand, Pearson engaged a small force of around 6,000 Zulu soldiers holding the Inazan River. Meanwhile, the British center column stationed at Eastland Wan was split, as Chelmsford gave chase to what he thought was the main Zulu army and put Henry Pulleine in charge of the garrison. While he was away, a scout spotted 20,000 Zulu soldiers who promptly launched an assault on the Eastland Wan encampment. The British met them head-on, and while they stalled the Zulu chest, the horns outflanked and enveloped them. The British center then withdrew in a poorly coordinated effort to consolidate before being overwhelmed by the Zulu center. The Battle of Eastland Wan was the most costly engagement for the British during the entirety of the war. Despite their losses, a group of about 150 British stragglers that had survived the battle set up defenses in Rorke's Drift. a religious mission station and hospital, before being met by a Zulu force composed of somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 reserves under the command of Prince Amanzi. The prince had disobeyed Cetshwayo's orders to remain on the defensive and paid the price for it. The Zulu were unable to scale the walls that separated them and the British, and only managed to kill about 17 soldiers, sustaining 850 casualties themselves before then withdrawing. Meanwhile, the British right column, led by Pearson, was besieged by a Zulu force numbering some 12,000 men. Due to the massacre at Eastland Wan, Chelmsford was unable to relieve Pearson. On the 11th of February, news of defeat at Eastland Wan also reached London, and reinforcements were dispatched to South Africa. By the 7th of March, the first reinforcements arrived in the port of Natal, forming the new center column to continue the first invasion under Chelmsford's command. On the 28th of March, Chelmsford ordered Colonel Wood to attack the Zulu in Holobane in an effort to distract the main Zulu army and relieve Pearson in the south. Wood took a small detachment of his men to harass the Zulu force and ordered a retreat after realizing he was up against 20,000 Zulu. So he then prepared a defense as to not repeat the mistake at Eastland Wan, and just a day later the Zulu fell into his trap in the Battle of Kambula, the 29th. 20,000 Zulu engaged 2,000 British soldiers under the command of Wood, and in just a few hours the Zulu lost around 800 men, while the British only lost 18. This was the turning point of the Anglo-Zulu War. Since Chelmsford's distraction worked, he proceeded to relieve Pearson, but he was attacked on the 2nd of April by 11,000 Zulu. This time, however, his force comprised of 2 cannons, 4 rockets, 2 Gatling guns, and over 5,000 British soldiers. The Zulu lost around 1,000 men, and the British only lost 11. The next day, Chelmsford was finally able to relieve Pearson and lift the siege of Eshowe. On the 5th, British forces evacuated from Zululand to minimize losses, and waited until the rest of the reinforcements arrived from Britain. On the 16th of June, word reached that Chelmsford was being replaced by Sir Garnet Wolseley. Eager to repair his reputation before his replacement arrived, Chelmsford reorganized his forces, bolstered by the last of the reinforcements from Britain, and advanced quickly and ruthlessly into Zululand. In the final battle, which took place on the 4th of June 1879, the main Zulu force of around 15,000 men attacked Lord Chelmsford's force in the Battle of Ulundi. The Zulu were defeated, and the Zulu capital of Ulundi was razed to the ground. And with that final action, Lord Chelmsford resigned. Shortly after, Zululand was fully annexed by the Cape Colony, and Cetshwayo was sentenced to exile in Cape Town and later London. It was only during the final year of his life that he was able to return to Zululand and die at peace. Thanks for watching. I'd like to thank my general staff on Patreon: Kevin Bertram, Jim Talbot, Dimitri Stillerman, Jeff Antolik, Patrick Reardon, Joe Crispin, Emmanuel Kang, Ademski, Derek Bello, and everyone else listed on screen. I'd also like to thank those working on the Armchair History team for making this video possible. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.